오랜만이야. 얘는 아직도 똑같아. 화장대에 앉아서 즉흥적으로 해보려고 카메라를 켰습니다. 아 시원해. 아직 머리도 안 말렸는데.
My college career got off to a bad start. I'd gotten so caught up in getting enrolled into classes that I totally procrastinated on finding housing. I looked at my calendar and saw that there was only a week left until classes began and I had nowhere to stay. For 2 days straight, I did nothing but look for a rental, but to no avail. Everything everywhere was full. I passed out after being up for nearly 48 hours, totally depressed. However, when I woke up the next morning, I checked my email to what seemed like good news. I got an offer to stay in a room from someone I didn't even remember reaching out to. Unfortunately, the listing had terrible reviews. Lots of people saying things like, "Got the heck out of there 48 hours after my first payment, don't ask why." Or, "48 thumbs down, a nightmare." I was disappointed, but I didn't really have much of a choice. I called them to confirm the move-in. They answered quickly, but didn't talk for several seconds. Hello, is this Soo-bin Kim, the landlord?
사람들이 모두 이걸 보고 있으니 널 드러내야겠다고 생각해.
Hello? Are you there?
Oh, hi. Yeah, I'm here. Are you Thomas? You wanted the room? Yeah, just, come over and move in tomorrow. It doesn't have to be complicated. Just pay me cash.
Tomorrow? Really? Wow, thank you. See you then. I only heard what I wanted to hear. I hadn't even seen the place yet. I was just that desperate to find housing. The next day, I packed all my stuff into my car and made the drive. I met Soo-bin Kim inside the house. She was really good looking, in a heavily made up fashion trend follower sort of way. She showed me my room and the bathroom and everything else I need. Then she said,
It's just you and me in here for now. Nobody else wanted a well-priced room, I guess.
I didn't say anything about it, but I thought it was pretty strange that nobody wanted to live here. I mean, I knew the reviews were bad, but the place itself was pretty nice. That's when my suspicions fell on the landlord, and what might be wrong with her. But the only thing I noticed was she never seemed to pay much attention to me. But that's kind of a good trait for a roommate. By nightfall, I didn't care anymore. As I finished brushing my teeth before bed, I saw a pale light coming from down the hall, spilling out from Soo-bin's room. Absent-mindedly, I walked down the hall to see what she was up to. Her door was open and she was sitting on her bed, watching a video on her laptop where some woman was speaking Korean. It was past 9, but she had a full face of makeup and was brushing her hair like she was about to go out. I approached the side of her bed and leaned over to see the video.
그래서 오늘 튜토리얼에서는 메이크업 루틴을 신속하게 보여줄게요.
Isn't it a bit late to be getting ready? I mean, it's only Wednesday.
It's morning in Korea. The video just dropped.
Soo-bin moved the mouse so the title of the video would come up. All the characters were alien to me. The only thing I recognized was the number 48. Then, right at the 48-second mark of the video, it glitched. It was like a strobe effect, how quickly the video buffered, flipping between the same 5 or 6 frames of her brushing her hair. I don't know why, but it gave me chills. It played some kind of trick on my eyes. I kept thinking the poor girl was about to slash her own throat with the comb, but then it would go back through her hair for a split second, only to threaten her neck once more in the next frame. Is there something wrong with the Wi-Fi?
No, she's still talking. And look, the video bar is still moving.
It was so strange. It was just some corrupted video file, but it was captivating. We watched it for almost a full minute, until at 1:48, it finally stopped. Soo-bin went back to brushing her hair, returning to her habit of acting as though I didn't exist. I no longer felt welcome in that room. I left and went to bed with that glitch flashing behind my eyelids as I went to sleep. I woke up to the sound of something breaking. There was no going back to sleep. Some kind of animalistic growling penetrated the walls of my room. I shot up out of bed and went to open my door. I saw that there were no lights on in the house, but something flickered from down the hall. I instantly knew it was that glitch playing on a screen somewhere on loop.
난 죽을 거야. 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 난 죽을 거야.
I looked down the hall to Soo-bin's open bedroom door. She was standing there crookedly, holding desperately onto the frame of the door for balance. She was silhouetted by the pale flickering of the broken makeup tutorial. Her hair was a mess, but through it I could see the unnaturally wide whites of her eyes as she locked her gaze onto me, laughing like a psycho. I then heard the sound of water hitting the floor. No, it wasn't water. It was urine. Subin lost control of her bladder. She slowly crumpled, landing on all fours with her stomach pointed toward the ceiling and her back arched so severely that I thought it would snap. And in that demonic stance, she charged at me. I jumped back and threw my door shut. She slammed into it and began striking it with her body, all the while making this awful sound that was some mix of enraged growling and agonized screaming. I had no idea what to do. I grabbed my phone and my car keys and opened my window to jump out onto the grass below. I sprained my ankle, but with all the adrenaline in my system, it didn't slow me down. I crashed on a friend's couch. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't go back there. I tried to tell my friend what had happened, but he didn't believe a word of it. I called Subin a dozen times, but she never answered the phone. My friend tried to convince me that it was all in my head, a product of all the stress I'd put myself through. He offered to let me stay with him for a couple days, so I took him up on it. For the next 48 hours, I tried my best to relax and figure out what had actually happened. Then, at midnight, my phone rang. It was Subin. All I could hear over the phone was sobbing and screaming in Korean.
나는 48에 묻어 있다. 나는 48에 묻어 있다. 나는 48에 묻어 있다. 나는 48에 묻어 있다.
She wouldn't respond to me, like she hadn't even realized she called me at all. I woke my friend up and had him drive me back to the house. I had to show him that I wasn't crazy, that this had all really happened. But when we got inside the house, it was worse than I could have imagined. Subin was on the floor of the living room, drenched in blood that had spilled from a gaping gash in her neck. The knife was still in her hand. Ever since then, whenever I close my eyes, I either see Subin or that woman from the makeup video. Apparently she died around the same time, about 48 hours after posting that glitched video. But I think it was more than glitched. It had to be cursed or something. I don't know the significance of the number 48 in Korean culture, but seeing it gives me chills.
아 시원해. 아직 머리도 안 말렸는데 진짜 리얼로 보여주려고 정말 평소에 쓰는 그 나이트케어
Working at McDonald's has ruined my life. I thought it would just be a way to save money for the future while I studied at my local college, but it turned out to be the thing that ripped my future from my grasp. It all started in the summertime. I was working the drive-thru window, which is as mundane of a routine as anything else you can do at McDonald's. All the orders were passing through my hands and into car windows in one monotonous blur, just like any other day. But despite the sheer number of people that passed by me during that shift, there was one individual who stuck out. The driver of the vehicle she was in was nothing special, just her whipped boyfriend. But her, I remember her. She had this awful helmet-looking wig of ketchup red hair, which just did not go with the rest of her style whatsoever. I tried not to stare. I looked up to the screen where the orders came through to see what they got. Her boyfriend got a Big Mac meal with a large Sprite, and she got a 10-piece McNugget meal with a large High C. That may not seem relevant, but I only say this because I know for a fact that I did everything within my responsibility to make sure they got what they were supposed to. I handed over the drinks first. Then I held out the bag of food. I expected her boyfriend in the driver's seat to grab it, but instead, she reached over and snatched it out of my hands, giving me this dirty, ravenous look as she did it. I see some weird things in the drive-thru, so that barely registered anyway. Have a nice day. They sped off out of the drive-thru, and I thought I'd never see them again. I was wrong. The woman with the ridiculously red hair walked inside not a minute later. I saw her as I was grabbing a McFlurry cup from the front. She was standing with her hands at her hips, impatiently waiting to speak to a manager in a very evident manner. By the time I'd made the McFlurry, the manager was with her. I wasn't really paying attention, but I could see she was being nasty for no good reason. I don't know what kind of day the manager was having, but he wasn't having any of this woman's attitude. They started screaming at each other.
You come into my establishment and you insult my employees. What the hell do you think you're doing in here? I ought to take you out back and rip your damn wig off, you piece of shit!
Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her spit in the manager's eye, to which he slapped her in the face. He immediately regretted throwing hands and disappeared from the counter to go hide in his office. That's when the crazy woman went berserk. She started hollering at the top of her lungs, pushing stuff off the counter and throwing random objects into the kitchen. She threw over a cup of straws, spilling them all over the floor.
What, y'all think I'm stupid? Think I can't count? I got a 10-piece, not a 9-piece. Maybe I rip off one of your fingers and see how you feel about it.
She was making an awful scene. At that point, I couldn't help but look. Several of my co-workers went to the counter to try and calm her down or get her out of the restaurant, but she was inconsolable. She pulled on one of those plexiglass barriers that hangs in front of the cash register and hurled it towards somebody. It nearly stabbed their eye out. Still, the corner of the plexiglass sliced them in the temple, spurting blood all down their shirt.
Let me see that witch that gave me my food. Come on, she needs a good beating.
I realized she was talking about me, and that's when she jumped the counter. She locked eyes with me at the window and lunged, but she was caught by a small crowd of employees who got a hold of her and threw her out the door. But she came back. Several times she came back, actually. Every time we thought she was gone, she would storm back in and throw something else at the people in the kitchen. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the manager came out and yelled at her.
The cops are on their way! You really want to throw your life away over one chicken nugget?
At that, she disappeared. The cops showed up about an hour later, asked a few questions, and took a copy of the security footage. I thought she would eventually get fined a few grand or spend a few nights in jail, but we never got word that she'd been caught. 3 or 4 months passed, the season changed, and I pretty much forgot about the whole thing. Pretty much everyone moved on, even the cops. Then, one day, I was working the drive-thru again, and I saw her. She came back with her boyfriend and ordered the exact same thing. My heart sank to the floor when she came up to the window. I recognized her immediately. She still wore that same awful red wig, but this time she was even more insane looking. She stared me down with this creepy, deranged smile, like some kind of psycho would look at their next victim. But she didn't say anything. She just took her food and drove off slowly, looking at me through the window until they were out of sight. I thought about calling the cops, but I figured she would leave once she counted all 10 of her nuggets. It gave me a jolt, forcing me to remember her littler rampage back in August, but after a while I wasn't thinking about it. Several hours passed and the sun went down. Then I was done with my shift. Right before I walked out the door, I remembered that I'd seen her that day. Just as a precaution, I got out my keychain and clutched the little pink bottle of pepper spray. I'd had this thing since I was a sophomore in high school, about 6 years, so I was sure it was expired, but I figured it would be good enough. I pushed open the door and walked out with long, quick strides headed for my car. Within seconds, I heard her walking behind me, racing to catch up with me, coming up so quickly that I was sure she was about to attack. Instinctively, I turned around and sprayed her straight in the eyes. Without bothering to linger for any reason, I turned back and ran to my car. As I fumbled with my keys looking for the unlock button, I looked back to the woman with the insanely colored hair. She was still standing, but she was staggering. I saw her wipe her eyes vigorously and spit on the ground. Then she looked straight at me. Her eyes were bloodshot, all the skin around them swollen and red and covered in thick tears. She bared her teeth like a rabid animal, drooling. She screamed horridly, then charged at me unhindered. I pulled open the car door and jumped inside, locking it behind me. I thought I was safe, but before I could even calm my nerves enough to start my car, I saw a rock bashing into the window, smashing it like a wine glass. I shrieked, and then her hands came through the window. They grabbed me by the hair and yanked me through the door, all over the shards of glass and dropping me on the pavement while still grasping at my scalp. She struck me in the face repeatedly, using her nails like claws, cutting my face and eyes, splitting my lip and scarring my cheeks.
This will teach you to disrespect me, you little punk. You gon' remember me.
I don't know how long I was taking that for. I didn't fight back. I just clutched my car keys so she wouldn't steal it. Eventually, I heard my manager come out and start yelling. That's when the crazy woman dropped me to the ground and ran off, disappearing once again. And what's worse, the police still haven't found her. They don't care enough about me to go looking, I guess. But she ruined my life. I quit my job after that day, and I moved back into my parents' house. I even missed my college graduation because my face was so messed up. I'm too scared to go outside. I'm just worried that I'm going to run into her, and she'll recognize me all over again.
The customer begins to argue with a worker over her order. There is no audio, but witnesses told police that the customer became verbally abusive toward the staff. That's when the situation turned violent. The customer tried to get behind the counter and had to be pushed back out the door by other workers. When she couldn't get behind the counter, she started throwing things. For the next 4 minutes, the woman with the red hair threw everything she could get her hands on over the counter. Wet floor signs, a trash can, plastic order numbers, another wet floor sign. Before leaving the restaurant, she grabs a big promotional sign and heaves it over the counter. Then she finally walks out.
Hi, what's the address?
It's 12150 Research Parkway.
And tell me what happened.
Oh my God. I was driving into work, parking my vehicle, and this gentleman, he's lying on the ground next to her.
Okay.
Oh my God.
Where are they? Are they in the parking lot?
They're in the parking lot.
Can we tell if they're breathing or?
Oh my God. I don't know, ma'am. I can't go closer. Yes.
Okay, come on. Calm down, okay? And so you're on your way, right?
Yeah, ma'am, I need you to stay on the phone, okay?
Stay on the phone.
Let all of what I am about to say be a warning to everyone who hears this. Hold your loved ones close. Keep them safe. Do whatever you have to do. Just don't let them get hurt. There's a whole terrible world out there full of sickos, stalkers, and violators, and most of them are hiding in plain sight. But for as long as the people you love are safe and sound and by your side, the world isn't so bad. It's only when that all gets taken away from you that the world becomes a dark, cold, and lonely place of constant suffering and endless despair. All of it started when she started working at Hooters. We were just dating at the time, but we'd been into each other for a while. I didn't really like hearing that she started working somewhere so exploitative, but it was her decision, and it wasn't like I didn't trust her. I was just too concerned for her safety. It turns out that my worries were well-founded. I'd give anything just to go back and find some way to keep her out of that horrible job. But at the time, when it really mattered, I didn't do anything. It didn't take long before I started to hear about the regulars at Hooters. To tell the truth, it always made my blood boil to hear about it. Those neck-bearded creeps who come in almost daily and chat with the waitresses and pretend their little crushes are going to get them anywhere. Liz, on the other hand, didn't seem to mind at first.
I'll have
A sloppy feast between them cheeks. I started hearing a lot about one regular in particular, this old guy named Roger, who quickly turned from a little excessive to a serious problem. Liz said he used to be so charming that they actually had some kind of minor friendship going on. But of course, Roger took that out of hand. He asked her for her phone number almost every day, but she never gave it to him. Instead, she gave him an old email address that she never used just to appease him. At some point, Liz said she agreed to give him her work schedule because he preferred to be served by her over anyone else. Whoa, don't you think that's a little private to be giving away?
He's gonna come in every day anyway. If he wanted to know, he could just figure it out. Why not save him the trouble?
Yeah, but it's just... Don't you see why it's weird for him to want to know that in the first place? I guess working at Hooters makes you get used to a lot, because that seemed to be the first moment in which she really caught a strange feeling from this guy. Unfortunately, by then, it was probably far too late. You know the old saying about throwing a dog a bone. Things only escalated from there. Roger would hover around her and follow her to her car, and even try to ride home with her. Then, he started getting handsy, trying to reach for Liz's waist while they were talking, and getting very aggressive when she didn't allow him to put his hands on her. That, of course, is very much against the rules of Hooters, so Liz threatened to throw him out of the restaurant over it. I can still hear the conversation in my head, the way she relayed it back to me.
I'm more of a loyal customer than you'll ever get. Do you know how much I tip every day? I shouldn't be treated like this.
This isn't a brothel, Roger. Just because you tip a lot doesn't mean you get to treat me like a piece of meat.
After that, Liz put in a word with her managers at Hooters, trying to get them to ban Roger from the establishment altogether. But they didn't listen to her, of course. They reprimanded Roger about the rules, but they were worried that if they started banning regulars, they'd lose their whole customer base. Just goes to show what Hooters really cares about. That's around the time that Liz remembered the email address she'd given to Roger. When she opened up the inbox, it was filled to the brim with hundreds of manic messages, calling her horrible names and accusing her of being a liar, and this and that, and all sorts of deranged stuff to say about a sweet girl like Liz. When Roger kept showing up at her work and harassing her every day, she went to the police and showed them all the emails, but they just shuffled her over to the information desk, where she filed a report that would probably collect dust without ever being looked at once. When the police ignored her too, that's when she finally quit Hooters. We thought we were done with all the Roger drama right then and there. Our lives were starting to take off together. Liz started a new job as a teacher, something she'd always wanted to do. I even proposed to her as we were getting out of college, and it felt like the right time to start sealing the deal. For a few months, things were pretty idyllic. Life was shaping up to be pretty nice, but then Roger showed up once more. Somehow, beyond anyone's ability to guess, Roger found out where Liz was working and started harassing her there too. The emails continued, of course, and they only got worse. Roger started sending threats and ultimatums, demanding to have her. With Roger showing up to the school she worked at, she didn't want to put any of the kids in danger by having him hanging around, and I was ready to get as far away from him as possible. So that's how we decided to move across the state to Orlando. It wasn't the greatest thing to have to do, but it helped us feel safer. We both got jobs at the same place, which was nice, except for the fact that it was a customer service call center, which was pretty soul-sucking. For some time, we managed. Roger continued to send his emails, but we thought he'd lost track of us and wouldn't be a problem anymore. When we moved into our new house, we got married. We were able to go on our honeymoon undisturbed and live our lives like normal people, for a few months at least. But again, somehow, Roger found us, but this time he showed up at our house. I'm ready for my meal.
Get the hell out of here or I'm calling the cops!
Liz found a letter in our backyard with no postage on it, which meant that it had been delivered by Roger himself. Liz didn't let me read what was in the letter, but it must have shaken her. She called the police and had an emergency court date set up for the next day. We compiled all the evidence we had against Roger, all the emails, the workplace harassment, all the interactions Liz had with him, and how he followed us from town to town relentlessly. Somehow, behind all semblance of logic, the judge thought that was all insufficient evidence to instate a restraining order. Rather than put a restraining order against Roger so that we could finally have some safety in our lives, the judge scheduled a hearing with Roger in the following weeks, which meant the judge notified our stalker that we attempted to get a restraining order filed against him. Liz and I were both paralyzed with fear when we realized this. We had no idea what Roger would do when he found out about this, but we knew it wouldn't be good. We tried our best to wait it out patiently, but we didn't get the chance. The last time I saw Liz, we were sitting in our car in the parking lot of our place of work. Her shift started an hour before mine, so she got out of the car and went in first, but within a matter of seconds, she called me, distraught.
He's here! He's here! Roger's here! Come get me quickly, please!
I jumped out of the car and ran for the entrance to the call center, but I couldn't get there in time. I heard the gunshots and I knew. There were so many gunshots. It was like each one shattered my soul and then crushed the remaining shards into dust. When I got there, Liz was on the ground in a pool of blood, full of bullet holes. Roger was there too, but I didn't pay any attention to him. His brains were splattered across the pavement, but I had no time to rejoice. The love of my life was dying right before my eyes.
Somebody call 911!
Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. I love you so much. You're gonna be okay. You're gonna be okay. I love you. We rushed Liz to the hospital, but it was too late.
What happened is a little bit over a year ago, she worked at a Hooters restaurant near the beach. Roger Troy, a 16-year-old man, 61 years old, and she was only 23.
Is chasing this 23-year-old girl?
It seems like that he became obsessed with her. He would write her harassing emails, follow her around, even stop by her house. She filed for a restraining order with a judge.
What is the address of the emergency? Hello?
Hello, she's still alive.
Oh, no.
Hello? I love you. I love you.
Help me. Give her CPR. Breathe. Okay. Put your phone down. All right. Phone down. Sir?
Oh my God.
Sir?
Okay. Come on, baby.
Yes, I'm 10-12.
Where's the ambulance?
Worry about this.
I need a bed. I need a bed. I need a bed. Come on.
Sir?
Come on, where the hell is the ambulance?
Sir?
You got blood in our hands, so we got clear. Back up. Come on, somebody help!
In every school, there's a weirdo. And I don't mean those kids who just dress weird or have uncommon interests. I'm friends with those kinds of people, and they're cool. The kind of person I'm talking about is in another realm entirely. Those maladjusted freaks with hard, empty eyes who don't get along with anybody, who just sit motionless day in and day out. The breed of blossoming psychopaths that gives you chills you can't explain. These days, From what I can gather from my little brother's current high school experience, those kids are a well-known threat. But just 10 years ago, when I was a freshman in high school, there hadn't been quite as many school massacres, and we just had no idea what kind of vicious animals we were dealing with. My little brother says it's an unspoken rule to not mess with the quiet kid. They leave them be, as in, don't poke the bear. Unfortunately, my generation didn't have quite the same experience. We would make fun of those kids a lot, and not just behind their back, but to their faces too. We mimicked their weird looks and strange mannerisms and made them the laughingstock of the whole class. And in the end, somebody paid the price for it. And to make matters worse, that person surely deserved it the least. I remember my first half of my freshman year rather fondly. Things were innocent back then. I enjoyed my classes and teachers as much as could be expected, and I was slowly becoming part of a new friend group. The one exception to all these warm memories was a kid I'll just call Phil. We were in the same math class for 7th period. Aside from him, that was my favorite class. It was easy math at the end of the day with one of the school's best teachers, a young pretty woman who went above and beyond to engage with students on our level, even having us get on computers from time to time. Everyone in the class was friendly with her, since she wasn't a huge stickler for the rules, but instead would go the way of being nice to keep us on task. Well, everyone except Phil. Phil wasn't friendly with anybody, and none of us were friendly to him. He spent most days in total silence, staring off into space, probably knowing that we'd tear into him no matter what he said. But one day, the nice teacher tried to get him to pay attention and participate by calling on him at random several times.
Phil, could you tell the class the formula for a linear relationship?
It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Miss, I don't think Phil is very good with relationships. Even as I'm graduating from college, my biggest regret in life is contributing to the mockery that tormented this kid on a daily basis. Not because I feel bad for him, but because I feel guilty for what he became because of it.
Pipe down, everybody. There's no sense in being rude. I'm sure Phil knows the answer. It's probably just hard to think when people are making fun of you.
You're right, miss. I'm sorry.
All right, Phil. I know you're a smart kid, so you should know this. What's the shape of a quadratic?
I think Phil thought he was going to be off the hook after the first one, based on his reaction to the second question. He seemed to make no effort to speak an answer. Rather, it looked more like he was exerting every possible ounce of effort to contain himself from screaming and throwing some kind of tantrum.
Phil, would you please stay after class? I know you're smart enough to know these things, but I also know you've been having a lot of trouble paying attention. I'd like to review some things one-on-one.
For the rest of the class, Phil wouldn't take his eyes off the teacher. Every once in a while, I glanced over to see if he was still staring, and every time, Phil got a little scarier. I could see veins bulging out from his head. He held his jaw so clenched that the muscles flexed visibly under his face. His eyes were bloodshot from so much unblinking staring, and his whole body tremored ever so slightly. When the bell finally rang, signifying the end of the school day, I was very much relieved to get out of that room with him, despite the fact that my own day wasn't yet over. Not to mention that I'd gotten a detention earlier in the day for talking too much in another less lenient class. I wasn't in a rush to get there, however. I was the last person to get up and walk out of the classroom, leaving the teacher alone with Phil. Right as I heard the door click shut behind me, a chill ran down my spine, but I had no idea why at the time. I put the feeling behind me and walked very lazily to the other side of the school to serve my detention. An hour or so later, I was finished up and ready to go home. I walked out of the building toward the rear of the campus, but since I missed the school bus for detention, I had to go through the bus loop and out the gate to find a stop for the city bus. I remember it was a really nice sunny day, so I was taking my time, soaking in the rays of the outdoors after being stuck inside all day. That's when I noticed something really strange happening way on the other side of the parking lot. I saw Phil rolling what looked like a trash can over the curb and down into a ditch that led into a patch of woods. He looked like he was really struggling with it, but he mustered whatever scrawny strength he had. Right after he kicked the can down the slope into the trees, he wiped his forehead and looked all around, like he was worried about being watched. Of course, I stopped in my tracks to watch whatever this was unfold, and Phil looked right at me. He was several hundred feet away, but that made no difference. I could see the expression on his face clearly. Another sharper chill ran through my whole body. That look, it was the look of a killer, and it was staring into my soul. I ran out the parking lot without looking back and prayed that he wouldn't find me while I was waiting for the bus. Thankfully, I didn't see any more of him that day, but very unfortunately, I wasn't able to maintain my ignorance about his actions for long. That nice teacher didn't show up the next day, but really, she never left the school, unless you count rolling down a ditch in a trash can as leaving. Phil followed her into the bathroom and slashed her with a box cutter, among other things that make my stomach turn. It was all over the national news, and now I'm forced to live with the guilt of how I contributed to it for the rest of my life.
I see graphic testimony describing the moment Colleen Ritzer's body was found buried beneath a pile of leaves and debris. We also heard from a former student who was one of the last to see the young math teacher alive.
When she was in the recycling barrel, Chisholm is seen on surveillance wheeling from the school bathroom to the woods.
I have been in television for 24 years.
I just came to get something to eat.
And I have very seldom been at a loss for words.
Sir, I just came to get something to eat.
But I don't even know what to ask you first.
When I was a kid, I didn't have much money. My mom raised me by herself while she worked 2 jobs, so I spent a lot of time alone in our apartment. I had to fend for myself as far as making food and finding things to do. For food, I frequented the closest and cheapest thing there was, the McDonald's around the corner. It was easy and I only needed a handful of quarters to get a meal, which was all I had. As for my entertainment, one thing I did have was my mom's old desktop computer with a CRT monitor. It was already old by those days' standards, and this was before we had smartphones. Despite that, to me, access to the internet was an absolute luxury. The big thing on the internet back then was chat rooms. Stuff like Facebook and Instagram didn't exist yet, so just about the only way to talk to people besides email was a chat room. There wasn't much to it, just some basic information like their name and age. And most of the time the chat rooms were community-based, so you'd be talking to people that lived somewhere in your city. I thought it was a pretty neat way to potentially meet people in the real world, though it did end up having some problems. There was one guy I remember meeting very clearly. He was really cool to talk to online. His name in the chat room was John, and he was around my age. We traded messages almost every day for a few weeks, and we even played the original Counter-Strike together. Then one day he said he wanted to meet up and get something to eat. I had nothing better to do, as usual, so I agreed. But I had to ask if he lived close by. I didn't have a car or a bike, and I couldn't really afford to take the bus. I was a slight bit cautious, so I didn't tell him my home address. I just asked if he could meet me at the McDonald's by the big intersection near my place. He said that was no problem, so we agreed to meet there at 6 o'clock that evening. I have to admit I was pretty excited. I never met any of the people I talked to on the internet before, and to be honest, I didn't really have many friends, even at school. I had high hopes to hang out with this guy more regularly, even before I'd seen him for the first time. I raided my mom's coin jar for some quarters, just enough to get a Happy Meal as usual. Then I walked out into the street around 5 minutes before we were set to meet. I got to the McDonald's at 6 but didn't see him. I kept an eye out for the green jacket John said he'd be wearing as I took a seat in the dining room. The McDonald's employees recognized me as I was there almost every day. I decided to wait for John to get there before I ordered, knowing I wouldn't be bothered by the workers. After a few minutes, I started to get a little anxious. I didn't have a cell phone as they weren't very common back then. I was just sitting there in silence, looking around the dining room. That's when I saw a strange-looking man wearing a trench coat standing by the window, staring at me. The moment I made eye contact with him, he began shuffling towards me, until he was standing right next to my table. The table was about waist height on him, and he held a Happy Meal box right over the edge. "You look hungry, little boy. Would you like something from my Happy Meal?" No, I'm good, thanks. I'm just waiting for someone." "Oh, are you waiting for John? He's my son." Without asking, the man sat down right next to me in the booth, when there was a perfectly good seat right across from me. He shifted the Happy Meal box and set it in his lap, even though the table was right there. He leaned in and mumbled in my ear, like he was about to say some kind of secret. He called me and said he was about to ride his bike to meet somebody here. I know this isn't the greatest part of town, so I thought I should drive over to make sure everything was safe. But I figured he'd be here by now. Oh, I hope he's okay. But while we're waiting, you should eat something. I bought this Happy Meal for the two of you. Come on, don't be shy. I really didn't know how to feel about the guy. I was pretty young at the time now that I think about it. I guess I didn't really have a proper sense of people's intentions. On the one hand, he was really invading my personal space. But on the other hand, his story made sense to me. I mean, how else would he have known the name of the person I was waiting to meet? What made me give him the benefit of the doubt, though, was the growling in my stomach. I knew I could have paid for my own meal, but I didn't think there was anything wrong with getting a little free food. Okay, sure. Thank you, sir. Yeah, that's it. Just reach in there and grab something at random. Be fair to John. He opened up the box as it was still in his lap, but wouldn't let me look inside. Desperate for some food, I reached in. But as far as I could tell, there wasn't any food at all in there. I grabbed onto the only thing that was in there, but it definitely wasn't anything that was supposed to be in a Happy Meal. It felt weird, almost clammy, and it wouldn't come out of the box when I tried to retrieve it.
Is everything okay over here?
Neither of us heard her walking up to us. We both jumped a little bit. I took my hand out of the box and the man very frantically closed it up. The employee stood sternly with her hands on her hips. Yeah, we're all good here. I'm just enjoying some quality time with my son. I barely had any idea what was going on, but I didn't want to cause any problems with the McDonald's I ate at almost every day, or the man who said he was my friend's dad. You see out there? My other son is on the other side of that window. You see him there?
You lying waste of space. Get out of here, I'm calling the cops.
Right then, the man threw the Happy Meal box to the side and ran out the door. The woman who must have recognized me, I'm assuming the manager, didn't let me leave. She asked for my mom's phone number and called her. It felt like I was in trouble for something, but I didn't know what it was. The woman told me to wait until my mother came to pick me up. So, I waited. And in that time, John never showed up. And I eventually realized that he never existed in the first place. But the weirdest part of all is, when I picked up the box the man had left behind, irrationally hoping for some food, I realized that it was more than just completely empty. There was a hole cut out of the bottom about 2 inches wide. I had no idea why anyone would do that at the time, but I eventually connected the dots. My mom came a couple hours later and took me home. We didn't talk much about what had happened, but a few months later, I figured it out. We were watching the show where they would catch predators, and on that night, the face of the man they caught was one I recognized. It was the man in the trench coat, and where else had they caught him but another neighborhood McDonald's.
I have been in television for 24 years.
I just came to get something to eat.
And I have very seldom been at a loss for words.
Sir, I just came to get something to eat.
But I don't even know what to ask you first.
I just came to get something to eat.
John, we've been through this before. What are you doing? I've got the chat log again.
When you go to the dentist, have you ever wondered why it's so common to see some little kid bawling and screaming out of fear in the waiting room? Have you ever wondered what's going through their heads? What torture they must be expecting to endure? Of course, most of the time, they're just overreacting, as little kids tend to do. But don't write them off just yet, because there is something real to that childish phobia. I'm sure everyone can relate to having to sit through something uncomfortable at the dentist. But there have been some dentists out there who really do justify the screams of small children. And I can attest. When I was about 10 years old, I was having some trouble with losing the last of my baby teeth. Well, just one of them, actually. I only had a few left, but there was one that had gotten fused to the bone of my jaw. It isn't actually uncommon. And like me, most people find out during routine x-rays. My family dentist said that most of the remaining baby teeth were fine and would fall out normally. But there was one that would need to be surgically removed. He recommended us to some sort of pediatric specialist in oral surgery. I was nervous about what they called surgery. I mean, I was only 10, but my parents told me they would numb me so it wouldn't hurt at all. And I'd had a regular experience at the dentist in the past. I wasn't one of those little crying kids. I didn't try to get out of it or anything. My main concern was just making sure I would get all my adult teeth. But on the day of, I got a bit anxious. The music in the waiting room was oddly loud, much louder than any dentist or doctor I'd ever been to. My mom didn't seem to notice. She checked me in and found us a seat, and after a little while of being bored in the soulless waiting room, it was my turn. The dentist came out of the back all sweaty and out of breath for some reason. He had a clipboard in his hand from which he read and called out my name.
Alex, you're up next.
Go on. Get up, Alex. Don't be shy.
I timidly stepped toward him, and as I got close, I noticed two things. One, he was really fat, especially in the gut, which was right at eye level. And two, he reeked like he hadn't showered in a long time.
There you are. How many teeth you leaving in the office today?
Oh, just the one.
My mom didn't seem to notice what was making me clam up. I followed him into the back section, though I really didn't want to. However, everything seemed somewhat normal until I hopped up into the chair and he began to lower me down as he checked over the x-ray one more time. Right after that was when things suddenly went wrong. He didn't ask for me to open my mouth. He just grabbed my face and rested his arm on my neck and chest as he pinched open my jaw to shine a light inside. And of course, that's when he asked his questions.
Are you afraid of needles, Alex?
I couldn't speak because he was holding my jaw open. I tried to say no, but all that came out was some kind of whimper.
Can you stay still for me, Alex?
I squirmed from the discomfort, unable to respond.
Well, I guess not then.
Then, out of nowhere, he started clamping down on my arms and legs, then strapped them into some kind of medical straitjacket. I screamed and tried to break free, but this guy was big.
Mommy! Mom! Help me!
The dentist pushed my forehead down and strapped my head into the device that kept me from being able to move. Then he got to work. There were no shots, no numbing agents, no help from the nurse. He just started cutting into the flesh of my mouth, digging at the roots of my baby tooth. I tried to scream so much, but I almost choked on the blood that was spilling into my mouth. And when he put that vacuum tube in there and turned it on, I don't think there was any way someone in the waiting room could hear me no matter how loud I tried to get.
Well, that wasn't so bad, now was it? You know what, though? I know I saw a few more baby teeth in there than just the one. What kind of dentist would I be if I only did a quarter of a job?
I couldn't even protest with screams anymore. I was in shock from the pain. I couldn't do anything, and nobody helped me as that man stuck pliers into my mouth and ripped out 3 more teeth. When he was done, he shoved gauze into my mouth and left without saying a word. For a few minutes there, I was alone, just in pain. When he came back, my teeth were nowhere to be seen, but I was finally unstrapped. Unable to stop from shaking, some random nurse basically dragged me back into the waiting room. My mother lost it when she saw me.
What did you do to him?
I don't really remember what happened after that. I passed out or zoned out, and all I can recall is hearing some shouting and fighting, and getting taken straight to the hospital afterwards, where I finally got some painkillers. My mother sued that guy along with a bunch of other parents whom he'd done something similar to. He lost his license soon after. I just hope he gets thrown in jail one of these days.
A local dentist accused of hurting children in his care has voluntarily agreed to give up his license to practice in Florida.
This investigates a local dentist accused of abuse. He is denying those allegations.
Today, people gathered outside Dr. Howard Schneider's office to protest his dental practice. While our crew was there, one woman walked up and actually put her hands on Dr. Schneider. You see the nurse right there getting him away and took him inside. Then that woman just ran off.
I used to go to Hooters all the time. I really was one of those guys who hung around there every weekend, pining for attention from all the pretty girls and hoping to score a date with one. But I should warn you, from my experience, there could be a cost to that habit which you won't see on your tab. Some of those girls are after more than just tips. But don't take that the wrong way. I certainly did. And all the time I wasted in there, I got to know nearly all the girls by name. I'd always strike up conversation as I ordered the same beer and wings every time. So often to the point that the waitresses started to know my order before I even said a word. There was this one girl I was super interested in. Her name was Stephanie. I made sure to see every angle of every girl that worked there. And Stephanie was the hottest by far. And she was the most popular without a doubt. The way she worked creeps like me for tips. I'm just a sucker for it. I tried really hard to get in close with her. I guess looking back on it now, people would call it simping. But it turned out to be more than just a cringy mistake for me. One night, I'd called up a friend and asked him to go to the bar with me. Of course, we ended up at Hooters. This friend of mine was not so different from me. We backed each other up in conversation. And after we'd spent a few hours in there, things seemed to be going our way. It was approaching closing time, so the girls had enough spare time to linger with us a little longer than usual. I was chatting up Stephanie, and my friend was capturing the attention of another fine Hooters girl. The only problem was, and I'm a little ashamed to admit I caught this, but I knew that Stephanie and this other girl kind of hated each other. There were a lot of times I'd hear them get into fights and get really nasty, so I was surprised to see the two of them together. Still, Stephanie shot that other girl some dirty looks that night. Despite all that, I tried to make the best of it. But then, Stephanie dropped a bit of a bombshell.
Yeah, so I know you've been waiting for the right moment to ask me on a date or whatever, but I'm just letting you know that this is my last shift, so don't miss your chance, Jack.
Wait, what? You're leaving? For what?
I'm going to college, dummy. Where do you think all your money's been going?
Oh, well, I guess you gotta move on. But I'll take you up on that last chance for a date. When are you free?
I'm free as soon as I clock out, babe. And you can bring that cute friend of yours, too.
As she finished speaking, she twirled around and walked away from us. My friend and I dropped our jaws in disbelief. But we chose to believe. This was the best thing that had happened to us in a long time. We closed our tabs and made sure to tip even more handsomely than usual. Then we waited impatiently for our dates to get off work. Finally, we all joined up and left the restaurant, then piled into my car. I remember my head being a mess right about then. With the beers in my system and the girls in my car, I was distracted. The first mistake I made was driving home from Hooters on autopilot, because I had this weird route through some back roads that I wouldn't have taken if I'd been thinking about not creeping out the passengers I had. As soon as I made the turn off the main road onto that dark, narrow stretch into the woods, the car fell silent, and things got tense. Sorry about the deserted road, everyone. This is the way I usually take to get around all the traffic.
Oh, don't worry, Jack. You're doing just fine.
I was a little confused as to what Stephanie meant by that, but before I could even ask, something else came up. I saw a flash of bright headlights in my rearview mirror, quickly growing as some van was accelerating towards us. Around the same moment, I could hear the distant roar of several motorcycles, which I never heard on this road. I kept looking into my mirror thinking the van would slow down to avoid rear-ending us, but they didn't. They slammed into the car and sent us flying forward. I hit the brakes trying to regain control of the car. The van just kept crashing into us from behind until they'd run us off the road. I finally got the car to stop when I saw the motorcycles catch up and surround us before the riders dismounted. Suddenly, there were half a dozen thugs in all black brandishing bats and knives and guns, all standing around my car in a circle. Then they made their move.
Get the hell out of the car! Now! Move it!
I saw Stephanie jump out from the shotgun seat, so I followed suit, abandoning my car with the key still in the ignition. I lost sight of Stephanie immediately. Then I was struck to the ground by someone I didn't even see. A boot pressed against my back and pinned me to the ground. The shouting of orders didn't stop. Actually, they got louder.
Out now! Come on, you two, don't be stupid! Get out of the car! Out of the car! We're warning you! Get out now!
I turned as far as I could to see, and my friend and the girl he picked up were still in the backseat of the car. They were trembling in fear, just frozen for some reason. No matter how many times they were told to get out, they just didn't. One of the thugs smashed the window. Another window was shattered, then another. And at the same time I could hear all that, I also heard glugging and splashing. like somebody was pouring water all over the ground. For a second, nothing happened. I thought they were getting out, but then I heard glass breaking again. And this time it wasn't a window. It must have been a bottle. A huge fire erupted from the car. It lit up the scene in an orange light, and I could feel the heat of the fire on my face even as I was pressed against the ground. Then I heard them screaming, burning alive in my car. It took so long for it to stop. When that was finally over, I got yanked to my feet.
Give us what you got, punk. Come on, strip. Clothes, money, phone. Everything you own is ours. Come on, don't be stupid now.
I did as they commanded, stripping to just my underwear and giving them everything I had. I was still in shock. I couldn't even think about my friend yet. The reality of it was too horrible. I thought about Stephanie. I was worried what they might do to her, but I couldn't see her in the darkness. Not until all the thugs finally let me be and climbed back into their van and got back on their motorcycles and sped off into the night. The last motorcyclist waited for Stephanie to climb onto his back before disappearing. She looked back at me and winked as I could feel my blood boil. She had this planned all along. No wonder she said today was her last shift. And that, my friends, is the real cost of creeping at Hooters. Your belongings, your friends, maybe your life.
My name is Candace, and I'm a single mother with 2 kids. My daughter Sarah is 7 and my son Tommy is 5. They were both due for their 6-month cleaning, and our regular dentist recently retired, leaving me to find a new one. Their previous dentist was very kind and always took really great care of my kids, so I was hoping to find one just like him. However, it was more difficult than expected. After months and months of strenuous searching, one dentist, Dr. Teal, had caught my attention. With great customer reviews and a 4.8-star rating, I set up an appointment, not knowing that this would be the biggest mistake of my life. Upon arrival, Sarah got her teeth cleaned efficiently, leaving Tommy to go next. Dr. Teal walked into the waiting room once he finished with Tommy's cleaning, and it was safe to say that it didn't look like he had good news. It's not looking good, Candace. Tommy here has a couple of cavities.
I was afraid of that. I've been letting him brush his own teeth.
It's all right. Don't beat yourself up. They all have to learn this somehow, and these things happen. Listen, I just had a cancellation if you'd like to get those taken care of right now.
Really? That would be great. I wasn't sure when I could get out of work for an appointment anytime soon.
Great.
Are you gonna be alright while I take your sister back to school?
Mom, I'm 5. I'm not a baby.
Okay, I'll be back as soon as I can.
I checked Sarah out and drove to a McDonald's drive-thru to purchase her a Happy Meal. I figured since Tommy was a big boy now, I could take a little extra time. I dropped Sarah off at school and drove back to the dentist. To my surprise, Dr. Teal had already completed all of Tommy's fillings. However, when Tommy tried to stand on his feet, he seemed very woozy and unstable. I know a thing or two about funny gas and how my kids responded to it, but this time, Tommy seemed more agitated than usual.
Tommy, are you okay, buddy?
I'm fine, Mom. You gave me a shot in the gums and I didn't feel a thing.
I told Dr. Teal that my son was not acting like himself, and he informed me that they had updated the funny gas formula. With this information, he proceeded to inform me that within 5 hours, Tommy would be back to his usual self. I'll be honest, I felt a bit uneasy with this response, but I decided to give it time to wear off. I kept Tommy home the rest of the day, and he passed out after eating some lunch. I occasionally checked in on him, and he seemed to be okay, until I went to wake him up to retrieve Sarah from school. I entered his room and gently shook him, calling out his name.
Tommy, wake up. It's time to go get Sarah.
Piss off! Let me sleep!
Thomas Alexander, you do not talk to me that way. I am your mother.
I'll talk to you however I want. Now while you're out, get me a soda and some candy.
I was shocked at Tommy's vocabulary. I grabbed his arm and dragged him to the car while the little squirt kicked and screamed at me. He shouted profanities at me the entire drive to school. And when Sarah got in the car, she had to sit in the front seat so that Tommy wouldn't hit her. He screamed and cursed at us the entire way home. I locked Tommy in his room and immediately called the dentist's office. The phone rang numerous times before reaching their already full voicemail box. I decided that I would give him until tomorrow for the funny gas to wear off. That night, I had Tommy sleep in my room so that I could keep a close eye on him. He slept throughout the night, and the next day he seemed like he was back to his normal self, so I got him ready for school. The day went great, and I nearly forgot about his hellish behavior from the day before. He even apologized for talking the way he did, and of course, I couldn't stay mad at him. However, the next day he seemed to get worse. He was more demanding and being extremely rude. At some point, I heard a scream in the kitchen from the laundry room and rushed out to see that Tommy was chasing Sarah with a knife.
Tommy! What do you think you're doing?
Mommy, Tommy grabbed a knife and said he wanted to chop the top of my head off.
Get out of my way!
I managed to snatch the knife from him and he ran upstairs to his room, cackling demonically. I comforted Sarah until she felt safe again. I couldn't avoid the sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach that something was very, very wrong with Tommy. He was usually such a sweet kid, and he adored his big sister. Even if Sarah made him mad, he would have never grabbed a knife. I tried calling the dentist again, but this time the number was out of service. I didn't know what to do, and I was scared. That night, after I put Sarah to bed, I went to get Tommy from his room. I opened the door and he held up a picture he drew of Sarah, with half of her head cut off. Tommy's picture brought shivers down my spine as I stuttered.
Tommy, let's go get Sarah and go for a drive.
Are we getting ice cream?
We sure are, buddy.
We quickly drove to the emergency room and explained the situation to the doctor. Tommy was taken for an MRI and unfortunately he came back with some horrible news. Candace, I need to speak with you about Tommy.
Is everything okay?
Yeah, he's not dead or dying, but your son is suffering from some severe brain damage.
Brain damage?
Well, we ran some tests and found that a chemical he had breathed in had crossed some wires in his brain. Has your son been around any chemicals lately?
No, he was at the dentist the other day. He mentioned that he had come out with a new formula in their funny gas.
Which dentist did you go to? I told him about Dr. Teal, and the doctor informed me that Tommy was one of a few patients that had suffered some brain damage after the funny gas they were given. He also told me how the dentist's office had been shut down, and the guy was on the run. My stomach dropped when the doctor told me that they would have to give Tommy a lobotomy. I thought they didn't do those anymore, but apparently in Tommy's case, it was the only option. I eventually agreed to have the lobotomy performed on him. They kept him in the hospital for a couple of days for observation. My sweet Tommy recovered just fine and seemed to be back to himself. A couple of months went by and we thought we were in the clearing. One night after falling asleep, I woke up to something dripping on my face. I looked up to find Tommy holding a cleaver and what looked like a rat in his hand, holding them over my head. I made Sarah different. Come see her, Mommy. I rushed out of bed to Sarah's room and turned on the light. She was laying in her bed, with the top of her head chopped off. Blood and brains saturated her pillows. She looked as though she was smiling, just like she was in his hand-drawn picture.
Tommy! What have you done?
I've been a cook at Hooters for several years now, and while I can say from a cook's perspective that it isn't far removed from any other restaurant, it's obviously a very different story for the waitresses. In all the time I've worked there, I've never seen any waitress stay for more than a year, and even that long is a rarity. Our turnover rate has always been extremely high, and I don't expect it to go down anytime soon. It's certainly no secret why so many girls leave shortly after getting hired. They have to put up with a lot out there, and the new girls get it the worst. It's like the creeps get off on singling them out. Given all of that, I try to make the kitchen a safe haven for the waitresses, somewhere they can get away from the prying eyes and unwanted advances. I do my best to crack wholesome jokes and strike up conversation that hopefully reminds them that not all of humanity is represented by the scum that comes to Hooters on a regular basis. And the whole time I keep my eyes on the grill. It never seemed to be enough though. Whenever I'd start getting to know somebody, they'd suddenly quit without notice. It started to hurt my feelings, to be honest. Don't get me wrong, I've never had to go through what they had to go through, but it always felt just a little rude to leave us short-staffed without warning. Especially since it wasn't that they would just quit. It was like they skipped town entirely, ghosting everyone so that nobody at the restaurant could even get a hold of them. At least that's what I'd hoped was happening. However, in the last year or so, something entirely more disturbing started happening. The rate of people quitting got worse, seemingly out of nowhere. I had my suspicions, but I didn't want to believe it. But once the police started coming to the restaurant with a barrage of questions, I had to face it. Those girls were really disappearing. Nobody had heard from them, and the last place each of them was seen was the Hooters. Somehow, the suspicion fell on me. The girls around here say you're very friendly with the staff. What's a man of your looks doing expressing interest in girls like these? It's nothing like that, sir. I'm just trying to be a nice guy, you know? Oh, so you're a nice guy, huh? No, I didn't mean it like that. I'm just... All right, you're gonna have to come into the station with us. That's right. They arrested me. They had me profiled as some sort of incel extremist. They held me at the station for a full 24 hours, berating me with the same questions over and over again. I had no idea where those girls were, but they just wouldn't take "I don't know" for an answer. I had no interest in those girls, even if I were a serial killer, which I'm not. But anyway, after all that mess with the police, they finally let me go. I had to go somewhere to clear my head. The last thing I wanted to do was stress eat, so I decided to go hiking. It used to be an old hobby of mine, before I went and got fat in my middle age. There's an old biking trail in town that lots of hikers and joggers go along to get away from the concrete and car fumes of the suburban roads. It's a really nice wooded area, very peaceful scenery. But if I wasn't a big guy, I wouldn't walk it alone. The trail was a lot longer than I remembered. In an effort to make the going a little easier on myself, I subconsciously followed all the forks that went downhill. I scorned the thought of going uphill, but part of me knew I'd have to do it at some point. Eventually, I found myself at the bottom of some sort of basin, surrounded on all sides by hills. The trail had flared out into an unkempt clearing, with a bunch of tall, thin trees being just about the only foliage that survived. Nothing about it seemed unusual at first, but small pieces of white caught my eye. At first, I thought it was some sort of fungus or moss growing in the bark of the trees, but as I rubbed my eyes clear of the sweat that had poured into them, I saw what they really were. They were pieces of paper which had been taped onto the trees, and they were everywhere. Dozens of them, all over the clearing. I traipsed through the leaves to get a closer look at one of them. Then, my heart sank. It was a missing persons poster, and I recognized the face. It was one of my old co-workers from ages ago. Her name was Sally, and she hadn't been seen in years. I tore my eyes away and found another slip of paper just a few feet away on a different tree, and on it, another call for help from a grieving family looking for their lost daughter. Again, my old co-worker, and this one from a more recent time. Judy from last year, Sarah from 6 months ago, Alice from last fall, and Tracy from just 2 weeks ago. There must have been a dozen of missing girls posted in that clearing. I couldn't handle it all coming down at once. For so long, I thought all of these girls had just no-called, no-showed. I'd even had the audacity to feel offended. And all this time, they were missing. Every single girl I've ever worked with was probably there. No wonder the police were suspicious of me. It was like someone was doing all of this to get at me. I fell to my knees and sobbed for several minutes. Eventually, I dried up and got to my feet. And when my crying quieted, I began to hear something else, digging. It came from some kind of large yellow tent at the edge of the clearing, where some shrubs were still attempting to overtake it. Quietly, I inched closer to it until I was right outside. The sound of digging from within was as loud as it could be. I stepped forward and reached for the curtain, pulling it back and revealing my worst nightmare. There, in the damp yellow darkness of the tent, some crazed and half-naked lunatic was digging into the knotted ground. But it wasn't dirt he was digging through. It was bodies. The bodies of a dozen missing Hooter girls in various stages of decomposition, all thrown haphazardly into the same disgusting hole. And right by my feet, the fresh corpse of the last girl who had quit Hooters, with her lifeless eyes staring right up at me. I didn't even get the chance to learn her name. What are you gonna do about it, Fry Cook? My throat closed up. I couldn't speak. I just backed away very slowly and closed the curtain behind me. Then I ran faster and farther than I had run in over a decade until I was finally out of the woods. I'm still traumatized from that incident. And honestly, who wouldn't be?
When I was a kid, I guess you could say I didn't have the best childhood. There was no single thing that made it especially horrible. Well, at least I don't think so. I was just unfortunate enough to have a number of things happening at the same time. There's one story I tell people that always seems to put it in perspective for them. Anyone who knows me now knows that I'm overweight. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I've lived with it for long enough at this point. But I've always been fat, even as a kid. Back then, I had this problem with eating candy and sweets. It was more like an addiction, or maybe a coping mechanism. I ate candy constantly. I have no idea how much I must have eaten, but it was surely an ungodly amount. There was hardly a time when I wasn't sneaking in a few pieces of chocolate around the corner, or in the restrooms at school, or even in the locker room showers. And of course, it made me fat. But it also destroyed my teeth. Not only was I unable to stop myself from eating candy, but I could never seem to bring myself to brush my teeth, or floss, or even rinse with mouthwash. By the time I was 13 and had all of my adult teeth, most of them were already so decayed and rotting that I couldn't even chew regular food with them. But when I tried to ask my mom to take me to the dentist, that's the part of the story where you might start to see why I tended to do such self-destructive things. Mom, can you please take me to the dentist? My teeth really hurt.
I can't afford a dentist. Don't be so needy. Take care of your teeth.
That was about as much love and care as I ever got from my mother. Even still, I can't say she deserves all the blame. Lord knows she tried. My dad left when I was little and she'd been stuck supporting me ever since, working 2 minimum wage jobs just to keep us afloat. The constant stress and hardship over the years took a toll on her. I only vaguely remember days from when I was very young when she was kind and sweet and motherly, but now she was cold and bitter and spiteful. But one thing I had always looked up to about my mother was her teeth. Whereas I had nasty black and rotten stumps sticking out of my bleeding gums, my mom had perfectly straight white teeth. I always wish I could have perfect teeth like her. But I was, of course, too far gone into my depression to take any sort of charge over my oral hygiene. So for a while I just lived with it. But I swear, out of everything I can remember ever happening to me, the worst of them all were all those weeks I spent in the excruciating pain of each and every one of my teeth being hollowed out to the root. If you've never felt it before, I don't think there's any proper way to describe it. I would lie awake at night, quietly sobbing, trying not to move a muscle or I'd be stabbed with pain throughout my whole face. The only time I'd ever get sleep was when the pain was so bad, I simply passed out from it in some kind of shock reaction. But I think I was even crying in my sleep, because every so often, my mother would burst into my room and start hitting me, yelling things like,
"What do you think you're doing howling like a dog in the middle of the night? Don't you know I've got work in the morning? Maybe I should just go in tired and get fired so I'd have an excuse to throw your sorry behind out on the street."
Mom, please, just take me to the dentist. It hurts so bad.
If you didn't want to be in pain, you should have thought about that before you ate all that candy, fatty. You know I can't afford to take you to some crook dentist. Just deal with it, you little baby.
I sure tried to deal with it, but I couldn't. After enough time and enough pain, I started to go a little crazy. Maybe that kind of response to stress runs in my family. My brain started thinking up strange solutions to my predicament. I felt so stupid and guilty for not taking good care of my teeth. All I wanted was a second chance. If I could just start over with my teeth and do better from then on out. And so, I tried to play dentist myself. I cooked up some delusional plan to grow new healthy teeth. All I needed to do was make room, to get rid of the ruined teeth that were in the way. If I did that, I thought, the new teeth would come in to replace them. One night, after my mom had fallen asleep, I went looking for some string. But we were so poor we didn't even have much of that lying around. I had to take the laces out of both of my shoes and tie them together to have enough length for the operation. The operation. I think that's what I called it in my head, but there was nothing surgical about it. All I did was tie one end of the string to my door handle, and the other end around the base of the tooth. Even just the act of loosely tying a string around one of my teeth sent shockwaves of pain through my whole body. With the string anchored, I slammed my door shut, ripping that rotten shard of a tooth out of my gums. I whimpered and fell to my knees in pain, trying not to scream, just letting all the blood drool out of my mouth. But after a few minutes, when I knew my mom hadn't woken up to the sound of the door slamming, I actually felt better. There was no longer any pain where that tooth had been, because there was now no tooth there to feel pain at all. I think I smiled then, at that realization, believing that what I was doing was working somehow. I got up off the ground and got ready to do it again. I retied the string to another tooth and did the same thing, slamming the door shut and ripping the tooth out of my gums. It didn't hurt as bad the second time. Actually, every time I did it, it hurt a little bit less. Yeah, that's right. I did it many times. I didn't stop until there was not a single tooth left in my mouth. Just a wad of bleeding, infected gums, and a face covered in blood. And of course, that's when I went to my mom's room to wake her up to this nightmare of my creation.
Mom, I did my teeth.
Huh? What? Wait, what the hell did you do to your mouth? You idiot!
I took out my old teeth, Mom. I wanted pretty teeth, like you.
Oh, like me, huh? You mean like these?
I screamed. I had no idea my mom had dentures until then. But obviously, I too had to get accustomed to them soon after. But you know, I was the only kid at school with perfectly straight white teeth without ever having braces. I finally felt relieved for the first time in years.
It's time to meet our first three eligible bachelors for game number one, and here they are. Good luck, gentlemen. Well, let's see. Bachelor number 1 is a successful photographer who got his start when his father found him in the dark room at the age of 13, fully developed. Between takes, he might find him skydiving or motorcycling. Please welcome Rodney Alcala. Rod, welcome. It's time to meet our young lady for game number 1, and here she is. Here is a young lady with a wealth of experience. She once earned a living massaging feet. Now she's here to educate our 3 bachelors in the art of amour. Welcome, if you will, sensational Cheryl Bradshaw. Hello, Cheryl.
Depending on your age, you may or may not remember The Dating Game. It was a show that primarily aired in the 70s, but had a few additional runs that saw it revived for a short period in the 80s and 90s. The rules of the game were simple. 3 anonymous, eligible bachelors would sit behind a wall, and a woman would ask them silly, sometimes risque questions. At the end, she'd pick one of them to go on an all-expenses-paid date with. Simple, good fun. In one episode that aired back in 1978, a charismatic, handsome man appeared as one of the contestants, Rodney Alcala. He answered all the questions in a cheeky, tongue-in-cheek manner, and the female player, Cheryl Bradshaw, went on to pick him as her date. Little did she, or indeed the nation, know just what kind of guy Rodney Alcala was. A volatile psychopath. By the time he appeared on the show, he'd already taken the lives of at least 5 people, one of which was the goddaughter of Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. After filming, he'd go on to take the lives of many more. You see, Rodney Alcala had a secret pastime. He liked nothing more than travelling around the good old US of A, forcefully having his way with women, and then ending them. His preferred method? Strangulation. In 1979, Robin Samso, who was just 12 at the time, disappeared somewhere between Huntington Beach and her ballet class. Her took her 12 days later in the Los Angeles foothills. A sketch of a man who was seen approaching Robin on the beach was drawn up, and Alcala's parole officer recognized who it was immediately. A storage locker in Seattle that belonged to Alcala was searched. Inside, investigators found Robin's earrings. Alcala's reign of terror finally came to an end when he was apprehended for Robin's demise. In court, Rodney Alcala acted as his own attorney, like many self-assured psychopaths do, as they have a tendency to overestimate their abilities and intelligence. He even interrogated himself in front of the jury for 5 hours, asking himself questions in a deeper-than-normal voice, and addressing himself as Mr. Alcala. Well, his weird strategy failed spectacularly. He was sentenced to the electric chair. In the end, it came to light that Alcala had taken the lives of at least 8 people, though the true number could be as high as 130. Why such a high upper limit? Because a discovery was made by the investigators. For years, Alcala had been going around telling people that he was a photographer, and that's how he was able to lure so many of his victims to secluded places. He used the promise of a professional photo shoot. A portfolio of over 1,000 pictures that Alcala had taken was found. Inside were the pictures of hundreds of different people, many of them without clothes. At least 6 families have come forward saying they recognize loved ones in the pictures who disappeared years ago and were never found. It's strange watching this dating game clip nowadays. Alcala comes across as incredibly normal on camera, likable even, and most people would agree that he was the most charming and charismatic of the 3 contestants, at least in the traditional sense. You would never guess what he had done in the past, and what he would go on to do after filming. It just goes to show that you should never judge a book by its cover. True evil can appear in all sorts of disguises. Thankfully, Cheryl Bradshaw, the woman in the episode who picked Alcala as her date, didn't end up going out with him after all. After filming, she said that he had a creepy vibe about him. Her intuition may have well saved her. If she had gone on a date with him, who knows what may have happened.
We're having them say hello to you and see how they sound. Number 1, would you say hello to Cheryl, please?
We're going to have a great time together, Cheryl.
Okay, and here we go.
Bachelor number 1,
Yes.
what's your best time?
The best time is at night, nighttime,
Why do you say that?
because that's the only time there is.
The only time? What's wrong with morning, afternoon?
Well, they're okay, but nighttime's when it really gets good. Then you're really ready.
What are you called and what do you look like?
I'm called the banana, and I look really good.
Can you be a little more descriptive?
Peel me.
Welcome back to the dating game, and Cheryl, we have reached the moment of truth, as we call it. You've heard from the bachelors, you got some great dramatic presentations, some good answers, but now I'm going to ask you a question. Will that date be bachelor number 1, bachelor number 2, or bachelor number 3? Who gets the dates?
Well, I like bananas, so I'll take 1.
Number 1, bachelor number 1, all right. Well, this is your date, and I want to tell you something about him, Cheryl. He's a skydiver, so he's got a lot of nerve. He's into motorcycling. He's also a fine photographer. Say hello to Rodney Alcala. Rodney, come on and say hello. Congratulations, Rod. You did it with a 1 answer.
Oh my!
Around the early 2000s, there was a high clown epidemic, where multiple reports of people being chased by clowns was at an all-time high. Most were classified as pranks, but regardless of their intentions, it was downright terrifying. The next story was inspired by some footage of a Ronald McDonald terrorizing someone at McDonald's. Here's what it looked like.
Oh my!
Have you ever wondered why they say, "Would you like fries with that?" After every meal you purchase, the offer seemingly comes up despite you already ordering. I know why, and I'll tell you, but I need to give a disclaimer that this story isn't for the faint-hearted. This allegedly happened to a friend of mine. We'll call him John, and we'll call his roommate Brad. The fall semester was in full effect, and the pair had both studied at the same campus nearby their student housing. It was alleged that John moved in with Brad as he was originally from out of town and needed a place to stay for the following curriculum. Brad was known to not be the most pleasant individual to study around due to his constant guitar rehearsals for his rock band. This would cause John to always opt to study at a nearby McDonald's. It was usually the go-to place for students, as this particular franchise was a 24-hour establishment. The McDonald's was never packed, at least not during the night shifts, so finding a place to sit wasn't so bad. You would occasionally find a loiterer or two, and were guaranteed to find this one female bookworm who would literally show up every night. John would always purchase a meal before studying, giving him a plausible excuse to dine without feeling like he was loitering. "Hello, sir. Welcome to McDonald's. How may I take your order?" "Just a Big Mac and a small Coke, please." "All right, sir. And would you like fries with that?" No thank you." "Are you sure, sir? It's almost 3 a.m. "Okay, so what?" "All right, sir, that'll be $8.19 after taxes. And how will you be paying?" Card, ma'am." John taps his card on the machine and awaits his food as the odd behavior from the cashier left him feeling uneasy. Nonetheless, John grabs his tray of food and sits down to begin his long chore of studying. About 10 minutes before 3 a.m., the female bookworm slides by John's table with a frantic look on her face and says,
It's almost time. You should probably pick up your fries now.
"What the hell are you talking about, lady?"
Dude, hurry up. We don't have much time.
The female proceeds to head towards the front counter while John sat there dumbfounded. John then gets up from his seat and follows the girl's lead by ordering a large fry after her. As the pair head to their respective tables with their fries, John approaches the female and begins to interrogate her by saying, "I got the fries, now what?"
I recommend just sitting down with your fries. It's literally going to be 3 a.m. any second now.
"What the hell are you talking about, lady?"
You don't know about him? The clown?
"Who?"
Duh, Ronald McDonald. Haven't you gotten the hint why they always ask if you want fries with that?
No. Why?
I recommend you always have fries on hand, or else he'll turn you into a McFlurry.
And what do we have on today's menu? Ah! 'Cause young lads. Such a fine couple you are. Care to share some delectable fries? Pretty please?
Okay.
Sure, sir. Good. I'll catch you all next time. And make sure to have fries with your Big Macs and Happy Meals. And that's when he departed the building. The more John studied at the McDonald's, the more he slowly realized that this was an everyday thing. Well, a 3 a.m. thing to be exact. The so-called Ronald McDonald would torment the customers and employees for fries, as if they were in debt to him for something. Nobody really bothered to do a damn thing about it and just went along with the whole facade. John, on the other hand, wasn't so pleased with the idea of being taxed to sit at McDonald's in exchange for his fries, but there was nothing he could really do about it. John had spread the word about the clown, but no one really believed him, especially his loud roommate Brad. One night, John decided to bring Brad to the McDonald's and prove that what he was saying was in fact legit. Brad didn't believe him and scoffed at the whole ordeal, as if the clown was some fake phony urban legend or some weirdo hustling food from regular customers. The time was 10 minutes shy before 3, and that's when everyone excluding Brad went to the front counter to pick up an order of fries. What makes the story more disturbing was how Brad carried himself. He had the same stubborn attitude and remained seated at the table despite John's multiple warnings. When 3 a.m. came around, the clown entered the McDonald's and immediately approached the bookworm's table first. Smells like this batch was fresh off the fryer. The clown then approaches John and Brad's table as they looked at the clown with their jaws hanging to the ground. Ooh, look what we have here! That's when John saw Brad holding a handful of fries with his bare hands, and John's fry container completely empty without an ounce of potato in it.
I recommend you always have fries on hand, or else he'll turn you into a McFlurry.
No. Ah!